My FEMA colleagues asked me, would you please explain before you give your talk what land use planning is and what is land use about before you go into the details. I said, okay, in my mind and in my students' mind, it affects every aspect of how we live. Where do we put the homes that we live in? Where do we put the shopping centers, the businesses that we work in? What about the healthcare clinics, the grocery stores, the schools, the highways, the water, the utilities? It's all a matter of how we design our communities. And if we think about it, the losses have been growing geometrically, faster than population, faster than growth, faster than the economy from hazards and disasters. And it's not, climate change has been kicking in, but more, for the history of time, it's been how we design and locate where we live. And we're not doing a very good job at it. We don't pay much attention to it. So what I wanted to do is talk about mainly why planning for resilience, why is it important, and then learning to build back better. And I want to thank the Department of Homeland Security, the Office of University Programs, because they've been really investing in a group of researchers around the country, and in my case for the last 6 or 7 years, and doing some work. So we want to look at lessons learned from the research, and then we're very much about translating the search into action. We work with, not for, communities in what we're doing. So I'll give you some insights. It's migrated over to Europe as well. Now we're working in Holland. And then some conclusions. So why planning? Well, I think it's really hard to deal with a disaster event unless you're prepared or unless you're looking ahead. And in the land use business, it's long before and it's long after. It's not so much a preparedness response. So if you're going to absorb the impacts, that's about vulnerability and reducing it beforehand, recover and recover quickly, recover transformationally, build back better, more resilient, as well as adapt. There's so much uncertainty. Well, you could do these things without planning, but I'd say it'd be a lot harder to do it. It'd be much easier to do it with. So what we've been working on for quite a while is this whole notion of what makes a good plan. And why should communities do a lot of planning, and I'll get at that in a moment, even the smallest places. And what makes a good plan? What are the best practices? I have a colleague, Dave Gottschalk, of the American Planning Association, long-term professor at the University of North Carolina, where I taught many years, who passed away this morning. I just found out, but I work closely with him in developing these tools. And he talks about, when we talk about two broad kind of ways of thinking about it, a good plan should have a vision, it should set the direction. It should have the highest fact base available in terms of the science and technology. It should also have these policies, and I'm going to talk about the land use policies. They guide action, right? Where we're going to build, how we're going to build. A good plan also needs legs. It should be deeply embedded in the community. It's not something that a planner or an architect or an engineer thinks up back in the department and lays it on the community. It must be rooted in to the people that are being affected. There also needs to be good monitoring, good the social capital, vertical, horizontal coordination, and so on. Does a lot of things. I want to talk about the land use policies in a moment, in a bit here. And it's just not regulatory. Land use policy, from a regulatory perspective, though, it all happens at the local government. The federal government can't do that. The Constitution doesn't allow the federal government to regulate private property. States are allowed to do it, but they enable local governments across the U.S. So that's where the power is. And these are fine-grained decisions that typically grounded in, from the parcel to the neighborhood and so on, about what a community looks like. But it also has a lot to do with tax incentives, land investments, and so on, infrastructure that shape growth and land use in a community. But we did a 4-year study, completed a couple of years ago. And what we did is we wanted to look at the range. We looked at 175 local governments, and we looked at their local hazard mitigation plan, which I know FEMA has is a big part of what FEMA promotes. And every local government has to have one to be eligible for pre- and post-disaster mitigation funding. Well, we wanted to look at where were the actions to get to reducing vulnerability, promoting mitigation. We found that the land use requirements were the lowest, as you can see here. Even though the Rose study, which was cited previously, I haven't read the new one, the National Building Institute's new one, but the benefit cost ratio, yes, is 4:1, but land use, it goes up higher than that. Yet that's the least used. We find that these plans typically rely more on, let's focus on emergency services because we want to maybe elevate the generator, fix the shutters on the emergency building, or we want to do education or structural investment, kind of one-shot deals, okay? And the plans tend to be focused on single projects at a time. They tend to be ordered in a priority, but they're not woven into the fabric of how land use is governed in a community. They tend to be social isolates, I call them. They're not well connected to how we make decisions, all right? And they tend to be focused on an emergency management, for emergency managers, right? And you can't lay everything on emergency management. They do their, the FEMA folks do their, and the emergency have a certain skill set, but the notion of design and planning a city is tough to do when you're doing a hazard mitigation plan without help. So a lot of these plans, again, are stovepipe, but what I just want to say is, of the 175 plans we did look at, folks might be interested in a website we've developed called mitigationguide.org. It gets a lot of hits. And in there, we took the best practices, the best elements from each plan. Okay, the plans generally do not score well, but there are high best practice elements. And we walk through the different elements as you walk through a plan. They're consistent with the FEMA guidelines, and that website kind of gives some good practice. So I did talk about this notion that local governments are doing a lot of planning. This is a current study we're doing. And that communities, my colleague says, they're flooded in plans, even the smallest ones. That oftentimes aren't collaborating. These plans are weak integration. And if you see here some of the maps, they're disconnected, but let me just say you can be doing comprehensive planning, parks planning, affordable housing plans required by HUD, the consolidated plans they're called, the mitigation plans required by FEMA, the Department of Transportation plans, or Department of Transportation in DC here requires metropolitan organizations to do regional transportation plans, which trickle down to the local, and on it goes, okay? So even the smallest communities are doing these mandated, federally mandated, oftentimes state-mandated plans. And so what happens is, I was on a National Research Council committee for a couple of years, and we were examining coastal risk. This was after Hurricane Sandy. So I decided where this research idea came from was I'm going to look at a couple of small New Jersey coastal communities before the disaster, before Sandy hit. And this is a typical pattern. This happens more frequently than we think. The hazard mitigation plan of that community, if you see the blue area there, that qualifies severe repetitive loss, okay? It's set it in the plan. The whole blue area is the 100-year floodplain, all right? The same community has a comprehensive plan where the circles are kind of like either water gateways or the gateways from the coast, and they want to do economic redevelopment. They want to do tax incentives. The yellow area is the downtown plan as well. They want to do tax incentives, put in complete streets, invest in the infrastructure, and so on to attract and redevelop some of the vacancies and so on that have occurred over the last couple of generation there. So here you have two plans trying to work in the same community, trying to do opposite things. And again, what we found before in that first study was the mitigation plans, I call them like little engines that could. They're good, they try, okay, to do mitigation, but there's a lot of other activities out there that are not doing so well. So we decided, let's come up with something here. And we really use this in practice, and I'll talk about it in a moment. But research-wise, we said, there's lots of scorecards out there, but let's do something that makes sense that we think could be widespread across the U.S., and even now we're working with Rotterdam in Europe and Holland. And so what we decided to do is let's look at take a small city. In this case, it's on the North Carolina coast. And we're going to go through a three-step process. The first step is we're going to look at different neighborhoods in the city. Just like we think of hazards and population groups, okay, land use policies that come out that govern the design and location of different activities, they come out of these plans and investments. And so and they change across the landscape. They're just not uniform. And oftentimes they're focused on neighborhoods. You might have a downtown, you might have a residential neighborhood, you might have a poor or an upper income. The kinds of mixes of policies or strategies coming across the networks of plans changes, okay, across any one community. So on the first phase one here is we say, okay, let's look at these neighborhoods. Okay, we're then going to look at the hazard zones within the neighborhoods. In this case, the dark areas are the 100-year floodplain, and the lighter areas are the sea level rise areas that will be affected in the code. And this is a highly vulnerable community. The second is we're going to determine the vulnerability of each of these communities, phase two. And you can look at vulnerability in a lot of different ways. You can look at physical vulnerability, the buildings, the infrastructure, and so on. And you can look at social vulnerability, which has to do with the composition of the population, their ability to adapt and adjust, along with their income is one of the measures. But there have been quite a bit of research done on that. And also you could look at business vulnerability. So you can come up, there are all these indices out there that you can actually score and by neighborhood. So we decided in this case, let's look at the physical vulnerability, the property value investment, okay? And that's map 2, or in phase 2 there. And the red is the highest investment, and the light, you got the pink, and then you got the blue, which is the lowest investment, okay, per square foot in those neighborhoods. So then we decided that the red one in the middle is the downtown, and this is a low-income, struggling seaside community that's kind of inland from Cape Hatteras and all that. So phase 3 is actually score the plan. Let's look at all the plans in this local government. They had a parks and recreation plan. They had a hazard mitigation plan. They had a comprehensive plan required by the state, hazard mitigation plan required by FEMA. They had a small transportation plan, which funneled down from their federal funding investments for transportation. So if you look at the third, phase 3 there, you'll see on the map that the reddish, the light red and the dark red areas, we scored the plans, particularly the policies in the plans, the regulatory, the tax incentive, different categories. There's whole ranges of kites of policies that you can use to guide and govern development, okay, whether it's affordable housing or shopping or whatever. And the bluer areas are where we're actually reducing the plan score positive. The bright red areas and the pink areas are where the plan score negative. A negative score means we're actually promoting development. We're doing more investment and more attempts to. So if you look at the downtown, highest social vulnerability is the light red. They're actually promoting development. They're putting in, they call it even in the plan, smart growth. Smart growth in dumb locations. Here's another case where we looked at social vulnerability of Fort Lauderdale. The map on the left is a map of the different scores for social vulnerability. Red being the most socially vulnerable, green being the least, okay? I put an arrow towards the Sistrunk neighborhood. It's a low-income, African-American primarily community, and it is experiencing quite a bit of investment in terms of an enterprise zone has been established there. And if you look at the comprehensive plan, they have an economic development plan. They have about 7 different types of plans in the community, as well as a hazard mitigation. But you see here, the primary drivers for promoting development are in that low-income area. So what we do is we get economic investment, but very little attention towards reducing the vulnerability. The hazard mitigation plan gets swamped out, okay? That's why the bright red score, the lowest, the bright green are the highest scores in the networks of plans. So, and what we've been seeing is when we do look at different cities, it's like what we're finding out is we're getting an inverse correlation. And Ray Berbe at the University of North Carolina found a similar pattern years ago, but when we're looking at the networks of plans, we're finding that the cities are placing most of their effort into raising the vulnerability. The plans score very low, but the vulnerability is very high. In this case, social vulnerability. The one place that comes out positive, the blue correlation for both the 100-year floodplain and the sea level rise area, is where we found that there was a lot of emphasis in the low-income neighborhoods, okay, established during Jim Crow era, like Sistrunk, where they were doing investments for stormwater drainage, okay, and specifically targeting low-income neighborhoods that were regularly flooding. And, but the other patterns are typically the reverse. And there's a long history, the places of doing this type of thing. We've worked with the Association of Floodplain Managers. We've given webinars on this. And my colleague and I, Jamie Masterson, there's a tape recording, slides, as well as handouts, and guidelines. We've translated the research, which won awards and so on for this, from the American Planning Association, but we've translated into a user guide so that communities can use it. And I'll show, and that's been a big point of pride of ours, because I want to talk about Norfolk, Virginia. And Norfolk, we've worked closely with in terms of applying this card. The most well-read book in Norfolk is the tidal gauge. You got to move. When should I move my car off the streets? Okay, and up, that kind of thing. Then there's a great deal of it's regularly flooding. The stormwater systems don't work, drainage oftentimes, and it's just one of the highest risk cities in America. So we worked for over a year with the Norfolk planners and emergency management staff in walking through. And the big thing with applying the scorecard, we didn't do it. We want cities and communities to self-evaluate and to engage on themselves. And so what we found was this integrated, we've helped develop this approach. Norfolk has a whole series of plans, comprehensive plan. They got a Rockefeller 100 Resilient City Foundation investment. They won the award to do a resilience plan. They also have hazard mitigation, comprehensive plans, small area plans focused on the downtown, different neighborhoods. What did they do? They came up with an integrated strategy. And let me just tell you about this. If you look at the red areas, they said, okay, these are the high economic engines. We want to enhance these areas. They're already developed. We're going to make costly infrastructure investments structural to protect them. Okay, we're going to also invest in better transit and so on, make more dense places. But they're going to do the major infrastructure investment there. It's too expensive to do it around the whole city. The yellow areas, on the other hand, they said, okay, what we want to do is we want to do a gradual retreat. We're going to do a FEMA mitigation plan for gradual retreat. There's severe repetitive loss here. We're going to do gradual buyouts. We're not going to expand our infrastructure, water, sewer, transportation. So you look at their capital improvements program, they're not going to expand it. This often happens, though. You get one side doing something different than the other, but they coordinate with their infrastructure. They're going to down zone, and they're going to gradually retreat the yellow areas, okay? And the notion is, in the future, they want to do the green areas. The yellow and the red areas are both highly vulnerable, okay, to future flooding and sea level rise. The green areas, if you can see them, are not vulnerable. They're higher in elevation. They're vulnerable, but not as vulnerable. And what they want to do there is they want to do smart growth there, basically. They want to do mixed use. They want to do increase the densities. They want to make walkable neighborhoods. This is the language that they're using. They've just adopted their Unified Development Ordinance, which gives this plan teeth. And it's kind of an integrated network approach. I think it's a more successful, more efficient use of resources. And I was just going to say that the way we use infrastructure, we always don't have to build, like in Houston area, we build a highway, and then it stimulates all kind of development around the highway, right? And a lot of developments in the floodplain because there's no land use controls. Here they'll take infrastructure and they'll make the argument we want to live with the water. Living with the water, we're going to create a viable city. And like in Rotterdam here's a rain plaza a water plaza where it could be a soccer field, a basketball court, or whatever. The community uses it. It's in a low-income Muslim neighborhood. There was a lot of intense work by the city, the planning staff, to make it work for that neighborhood. And there was a lot of engagement going on, a significant investment. So I think that we can actually create infrastructures that actually are compatible with land use activities and so on. So just some quick conclusions, I see my time's just about up here, is that the land use question, the governing, the guiding, the location and design and development is the least used strategy in the 175 hazard mitigation plans we looked at. Yet it has the highest benefit cost ratio among all different types of strategies that we might use. Plans are underfunded, though, when we start talking about mitigation, and largely it's because of fragmentation. And there's even conflict across. And we think that too often we've been finding that there's too much, when it comes to disadvantaged communities, there's significant investment, but without mitigation. So you only to see these areas flood again and folks forced further into deprivation. So I have a set of policy implications. They're kind of self-legible, but I think we can start from the top in the federal government, get better coordination. Instead of mandating stovepipe plans and getting fragmented efforts at the local level, we also can provide stronger incentives through there's a community rating system, there's and a variety of other things that maybe could be used. And we also, because land in its use is such a localized activity, fine-grained, it's really important that in terms of there's a bottom-up perspective to it, and building capacity is very important. And we think that a lot of data is produced, and we expect users to just take it and run with it. But it doesn't always work that way with tools. We have to be trialing tools that not only maybe could benefit by research, but also designed in a way, tailored in a way that communities can use them on their own and self-evaluate. So I'll just kind of end it there, but better evaluation and better building capacity, yeah. I think it's really hard to go into an event and not have decide, oh, I'm going to do, resilience, build resilience after the event. And I think that creating pre-disaster plans, right, is that weave together the different ways that we govern, how communities are designed and built. And I think there's some good examples out there. I think a good one here, Norfolk's going to be ready, okay? I think more so than more so than other communities. I think this is a good case. I'm going to give a shout out. They should be encouraged. They should be given a break maybe on the flood insurance premiums. They should be given a break when they invest in structural protection, okay, like a levee or a seawall. There should be some encouragement, because we tend to, I'm in the land of where the taxpayers keep paying. 25% of all the flood insurance money payouts are going to 1% of the properties. It's because they keep rebuilding and rebuilding and rebuilding over the last decade, rebuilding in the same way. And there's very little in Texas. I'm independent. I'm going to do it on my own. And but there is a responsibility, I think, and there's a cost to the taxpayers at large. Yeah. I wish the Norfolk planner was here. She could give you a much better, fine-grained answer. But they did go through a process, a stakeholder process, and they had very good visuals. They just didn't have a public hearing at night where people come to City Hall or whatever. They went into the neighborhoods. They went to and they went over a 24-month period of deep engagement across. And that I think Norfolk is more primed maybe because people are ready to do something different, like I think Houston is now. And because of that regular flooding in the city, it's just constantly occurring. So some of these places, the neighborhoods, like the yellow area neighborhoods, I think are going to be, they need special treatment and a long-range retreat. I think building codes are good, are fine, but when you're in a sea level rise prone area and we're making investments now, are we going to be living in stilts and on top of, water? I think the land use question needs to be thought about a bit more. I've stayed another day to be with FEMA tomorrow because they are interested. And we're exploring how we might integrate some of this thinking, like in the community rating system, if you're actually applying looking at the network of plans and so on. So We've been doing in the Hurricane Harvey impact zone, particularly in the low capacity communities. Places like LaGrange, Texas, or League City, you probably haven't heard of these, maybe you've been to the Houston area, but they want to recover in a holistic way. They want to build back better. They had issues before going in, not just vulnerability issues, but other issues. And in terms of maybe lack of parks or lack of stormwater drainage problems, these kinds of things. They want to resolve these issues as they rebuild, because I think, like the previous speaker saying, there's an infusion of money coming in. But so we're actually working in 2 communities now, those 2. And we're trying to figure out a way to spread it out. You can give seminars and these kinds of things, but we think it's very important that they self-evaluate. We don't go in and provide them the information. We try to, you can, if you have GIS, you can use it. If you're LaGrange, a city of 5,000, you don't have GIS, you still can use the approach that we've taken. I know there are a lot of scorecards out there. I'm trying to get it, but we're trying to, it's a practical, and working it through, I think that we're finding some success. And I think it's, yeah, that's our next step anyway. And thank you to the Association of Floodplain Managers too. They've been very, very helpful, yeah. I'm still kind of new to Texas, but I've been learning that they don't like to be told what to do, the state agencies. And I'm coming from North Carolina, University of North Carolina, but I think, though, that FEMA could be the center point to get all the, you have HUD now, which is the CBDG block grants, which have to deliver to 50%, I guess, low income. I don't guess, I know, no. But there's a great leverage for maybe disadvantaged communities, okay? Not do a recovery just based on, it should be coordinated with FEMA to get the mitigation right with the recovery of maybe low income areas. You have DOT come in, you have Fish and Wildlife come in, you have the, there's so many different agencies pouring money in on the Texas coast right now. So much of it's federal that I wish we could, FEMA's in a prime position to get that going. At the local level, there's a bit of a struggle too. Sometimes the private nonprofits go in and with, well-intentioned, but sometimes you get inconsistent, with the broader, inconsistent investments between where you're going to run water and sewer and where you're going to put housing and these kinds of things. So, particularly low-income neighborhoods. Yeah.